In a universe as vast as Halo, sometimes the games just can't do the ever-expanding story of its universe justice. And with over 2 decades worth of characters, history, unique alien species, and many battles fought across both time and space, sometimes the best way to expand on those things is through written text. And while I will always argue that putting that story into the games will be the best and most impactful way to tell it, the expanded media has given us dozens of novels, comics, and in the last few years, a series of stories known as the Waypoint Chronicles. And now, for the first time ever, all of those stories are being brought together in Halo Waypoint Chronicles Volume 1, which will be hitting shelves May 26th, 2026. Now, this is not an ad for the book, although I wouldn't be opposed to doing that if you're listening, Halo Studios, but this anthology will feature 22 Waypoint Chronicles, as well as Halo Infinite's seasonal story intel drops, various Armory Infinitum weapon lore entries, the story shards from the Tenrai and Firewall Fracture events, and 10 all-new stories. But if you ask me, the coolest part about all of this is that there is an audiobook version available as well that features dozens of iconic voices from across the Halo mythos, alongside a handful of content creators that you all probably know and love. And while I will say that I have covered a few of these in the past, there are well over a dozen that I haven't, meaning it would probably take me years to get caught up if I wanted to do full-on breakdowns for each and every one of them. But with the release of this anthology just around the corner, I thought it would be fun to do a speedrun for all of the known chronicles, quickly summarizing their individual stories so that you're caught up on all of the most recent additions to Halo lore. Some quick notes though before I begin. Some of these summaries are going to be a little bit shorter than others, as they all kind of vary in story depth and the number of characters or interactions, and then for that handful of chronicles that haven't been published as of recording this, I haven't read them yet, so I'm going to have to make a follow-up video after the book is officially published if you want to learn more about those. But like I said, I still have a metric ton of stories to get through. Looking at it right now, it looks like my script is 30 pages long and well over 12,000 words, meaning that this once again will probably turn out to be my longest video to date. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Kicking things off with Halo Vertical Umbrage, which was the very first Halo Waypoint Chronicle, having been released all the way back in 2022 to help celebrate the 10th anniversary of Halo 4's release. This story is set in 2558 during the events of the Requiem campaign, taking place at the same time as we, the players, fought our way through the Spartan Ops mission, Everything Has Gone Wrong. We open the story on February 14th, 2558 with Fireteam Shadow, composed of Spartan Force Horatio Fry, Nina Kovan, Benita Stone, and Jason Kidman, who are preparing for a strike on a recently constructed Covenant Citadel, which was mass-producing aircraft. Moments before beginning their assault, the team received word that they were getting diverted to a far more critical target, the cruiser Panam's Canticle, and their new objective would be to board the ship and destroy its reactor. The perspective then changes to Sanghelios shipmaster Rinaloon aboard the cruiser as he reflects on the Covenant's time on Requiem, recalling how they had come to the Shield world 3 years prior in search of one of their gods, and only 6 months ago saw firsthand the reawakening of the Didact and Jewel Mandama's crowning as the Didact's hand. This location where the Forerunner had awoken, known as the Refuge, then became a sacred stronghold, with Elune and his warriors known as the Silent Blade, tasked with its protection. His moment of reflection was then abruptly interrupted as he received word that a hijacked Phantom had crashed through the cruiser's defenses, this of course signaling the arrival of Fireteam Shadow. The Spartans fight their way through waves of Covenant forces, and Stone breaks off and engages her active camouflage. The other three push on and eventually reach the reactor chamber, being met by Rinaloon and a group of Sangheli, who quickly engage them in close quarters combat. Fry is quickly overwhelmed and then directly engaged by the shipmaster himself, who was able to knock the Spartan down and land several hits before going in for a killing blow. But right as he goes to swing his sword, Stone reappears and is able to push the elite back, then pulls Fry to safety. With this quickly becoming a losing battle though, Kovan reveals her trump card, her Spartan laser. She then fires directly into the Pinch Fusion reactor, overloading it and triggering a total meltdown. Coolant and fire begins to fill the vessel, so the shipmaster and his surviving forces are forced to retreat, while Fireteam Shadow commandeers insertion pods of their own, escaping before the cruiser crashes down into Requiem's jungles. Watching this destruction from afar, the shipmaster is enraged by the loss of his men and the demon's affront to their faith, vowing to hunt down Fireteam Shadow and avenge his fallen brothers, now taking on the name of the Silent Blade. Elsewhere, Fireteam Shadow safely touches down and reports mission success back to the UNSC Infinity. Next up, we have Halo Winter Contention, which debuted in February 2023, alongside Halo Infinite's Noble Intention seasonal event. The story of this one takes place several months before the fall of Reach, and follows an earlier iteration of Noble Team as they navigate the immediate aftermath of the Covenant's failed invasion of the planet Concord. The most important thing to note is that this version of the team includes Rosenda A344 as Noble 5, and Tom A293 as Noble 6, in the place of Emil A239 and Spartan B312, whom we know from our time playing Halo Reach. The date is December 12th, 2551, which is a day to remember as it marks one of humanity's rare victories against the Covenant. But their defeat in orbit has left pockets of Covenant forces stranded who have begun to lash out against the planet's isolated settlements in the hinterland region. Amidst this chaos, a brutal winter storm has downed a Pelican carrying Noble Team, trapping them in the remote town of Scathy. And with reinforcements hours away and no air support available, the Spartans are forced to bunker down. June A266 then runs recon and spots an incoming Covenant force composed of ghosts, wraiths, banshees, and at its center, a towering Zashk pattern Draugr mobile fortress rolling towards the town. Knowing they're severely outgunned, Cat B320 devises a risky plan to use the team's only operable vehicle, an Arctic variant of the M12 Warthog, to directly engage the Draugr. Tasked with this mission are Cat, Rosenda, and Tom, who waste no time hitting the road, while Carter and the others remain behind to defend the town. As they traverse the planet's snowy surface, Tom tries to pass the time with some witty banter, much to Cat's dismay, but it isn't long before the team is targeted by enemy ghosts. Rosenda is able to evade their fire, allowing Tom to jump out and hijack one of the enemy's vehicles, and uses it to draw a nearby wraith and the Draugr's attention. Taking advantage of the distraction, Cat launches the Warthog into the air, landing it on top of the fortress. She and Rosenda then disembark and make short work of the crew. In no time, the three of them have taken control of the vessel, turn its weapons on the remaining forces, and completely decimate all enemies who still remained. Hours later, Pelicans arrive at Cathy carrying supplies and the UNSC Army Rangers to help secure the town. And after regrouping for debrief, Noble Team learns that they will be redeployed to another combat zone, but not with Rosenda, who is being reassigned elsewhere. So the team shares a quiet but heartfelt farewell, and they depart in separate Pelicans. Things then shift to several years after the conclusion of the Human Covenant War, with June, now serving as Chief of Staff for Spartan Operations, receiving a personal message from Rosenda. The transmission is warm, nostalgic, and representative of a closer connection shared between friends, showing that despite the years apart and the deaths of nearly every other member of their old team, the bonds between these Spartans never truly fade. Halo Sunrise on Sanghelios is set immediately following the ending of Halo 5 Guardians, and primarily depicts a discussion between the Master Chief, Arbiter, and Professor Halsey. The piece originally aired live during the 2023 HCS tournament, and featured all three characters' voice actors reading their respective lines, which was pretty cool to watch, not gonna lie. It is also said that this chronicle builds off of the early chapters of the novel Halo Bad Blood, in which the novel's protagonist, Edward Buck, had mentioned seeing this trio having a conversation off on their own, the details of which had been unclear, that is, of course, until this chronicle. The Pelican, carrying both Blue Team and Fire Team Osiris, sets down in the Swords of Sanghelios war camp, and the Spartans disembark. They are met by several Sangheli warriors, Commander Palmer, Professor Catherine Halsey, and the Arbiter, who warmly greets them. Happy to see one of his greatest allies and grateful for Osiris's help during the Battle of Sunayon, he then offers them food, rest, and celebration before they must depart once again. They accept his invitation, but Halsey states that the UNSC Infinity will not be arriving for extraction until tomorrow, so they'll be spending the night. While the rest of the group settles down to enjoy the feast, the Arbiter pulls the Master Chief aside for a private conversation. The two then reflect on years past, with the Arbiter admitting that he had refused to believe the Chief was dead after the Forward Unto Dawn had been split in two, and then Chief tells him everything that had happened to him since, mentioning how he had drifted through space with Cortana for several years before discovering Requiem, awakening the Didact, and then somehow managing to defeat the Forerunner. But he also touches on the painful truth about Cortana, reflecting on her sacrifice during their battle with the Didact, how she somehow survived within the domain and cured her rampancy, and then later went on to betray him and impose her version of order upon the galaxy. Sensing Chief's uncertainty and grief, the Arbiter reminds him of his own past and his actions during the Covenant War, acknowledging the countless lives he had taken and the blind faith that he had had in the Great Journey. But after meeting the Spartan, he was able to begin down a path of redemption, going on to tell Chief that if he was able to save him, he may be able to do the same for Cortana. The chief, using Arbiter's own words, replies with, "Were it so easy." Among other things, the Arbiter goes on to mention his idea for galactic peace through a concert of worlds, a multi-species alliance built on strength, honor, and mutual respect, an idea that he knows is built on fragile ideals. But as the sun begins to rise on Sanghelios, the UNSC Infinity arrives for extraction, and before departing, the Master Chief and Arbiter clasp forearms in a show of mutual respect, reaffirming that humanity and the Swords of Sanghelios will face whatever lies ahead together. Probably my favorite out of the entire collection here, we now move on to Halo Saturn Devouring His Son, which was released on Halloween in 2023. This one is a bit of a departure from most Halo media, having more of a horror theme, as the story is set on the distant asteroid of LV-31, where humanity stumbles upon the long-dormant Flood, who quickly overwhelm a local mining operation. And matters only get worse when a member of a Spartan Flood containment team is successfully infected and is set upon other survivors. Following the end of the Covenant War, the United Earth government heavily relied on megacorporations to help reclaim lost worlds and rebuild the UNSC fleet. In 2556, a joint operation between BXR Mining Corporation and the Imbrium Machine Complex established mining sites on planetoid LV-31 to extract much-needed minerals. Among those working in the asteroid belts was a Julian Donny, a former soldier turned corporate security contractor who has found a strange sense of purpose in the dangerous mining operations across the Marseille system. His newest assignment centering around a potentially retirement-grade discovery beneath Site 22. Julian and his team, led by their supervisor Mox, arrive expecting a routine security operation. Instead, BXR miners uncover something far larger than expected, a mysterious silvery structure that may actually be an intact Forerunner vessel. As they approach, the structure's metallic shell peels away, revealing its ancient interior. Though Julian and several others are apprehensive, Mox and a handful of other workers press deeper inside. Their transmissions soon dissolve into screams and panic, and before long, the survivors come fleeing back out. But they are not alone. Chaos erupts across Site 22 as miners and contractors alike are attacked by the grotesque, twisted forms of their former comrades. Julian and the others fight back with sidearms or improvised weapons, but it quickly becomes clear that they have unleashed a Flood, an ancient parasitic organism many only knew about from rumors or war stories. Aboard the nearby frigate UNSC Saturn, Captain Pedro Alvarez receives fragmented distress calls while the ship's AI Lycaon identifies the Flood threat and recommends emergency contact protocol Upsilon, the immediate withdrawal and bombardment of the site. Unwilling to sacrifice the valuable operation, though, Alvarez instead shuts down Lycaon and deploys Cyclopses, Hellbringers, and Spartan Fireteam Leviathan to try and contain the outbreak. By the time the UNSC forces arrive, however, Site 22 has already been overrun. Fireteam Leviathan then quickly falls to the Flood as one of the Spartans' Mjolnir systems became corrupted, preventing their helmet failsafe from stopping the parasite from infecting them. This corrupted Spartan then turned on their own team before attacking Julian directly. Back aboard the Saturn, Alvarez finally realizes that containment had failed catastrophically. So, faced with the possibility of the Flood escaping, he authorizes Upsilon and Corruptor protocols, giving the remaining survivors only minutes to retreat before Shiva-class nuclear missiles would destroy Site 22. Sometime later, Alvarez looked out across the smoldering battlefield and reflected on his failures, completely unaware that just moments before the bombardment, Julian and several other infected personnel had escaped aboard a fleeing Condor dropship, meaning that the Flood had survived and would continue to spread. Halo Battle for the Blood Moon is one of the few stories that we're going to talk about today that depict a joint Sangheli and human operation. This one in particular follows the perspective of a task force who carry out a raid to reclaim a banished Kemixuru crystal mine, while in orbit, a ship mistress faces a tense ideological confrontation with a banished High Warlord centered around the future of the Sangheli and their alliance with humanity. In the year 2560, the sudden withdrawal of created forces from Sanghelios has left the planet fractured and vulnerable. While many Sangheli still support the Arbiter's efforts to unify their people, others resent his alliance with humanity and either tolerate or openly support the Banished's growing presence in the Earth system. One of the Banished's primary targets is Suban, Sanghelios' moon and the main source of the Kemixuru crystals used in all needle-based weaponry. And after the Banished have established operations within the mines of Shual-Ri, the Swords of Sanghelios prepare for a joint assault alongside Spartan Fireteam Joragumo to drive them out. While from orbit, Shipmistress Maki Chava commands the stealth corvette Scorin's Blade, gathering intelligence on the Banished fleet, despite knowing her forces are heavily outgunned. On the surface, Evocati Fallen Toe leads a mixed team of Sanghelios, Spartans Gliss and Trell, and the ex-Shakar Kigyar sniper Dax to infiltrate the mining site. Once in position, their allied forces launch their attack, while Swords Banshees bombard the quarry and destroy multiple banished siege haulers carrying volatile chemic suru. And while their initial assault did succeed, banished reinforcements quickly regained ground. Meanwhile, Maki receives a transmission from the banished dreadnought Ghost of Barillon, sent by High Warlord Ornifulsam. He blames humanity in the Arbiter for the Sangheli's suffering and urges her to abandon the swords, join the banished, and cast out the demons who are desecrating Suban. Rather than shutting him down, Maki allows him to speak, recognizing the pain behind his words. As the battle intensifies down on the surface, Fall clashes with the Jiralhane chieftain Ipso, who mocks the Sangheli for their divisions. The Brute eventually overpowers Fall and moves in for the killing blow, only for Spartan Gliss to leap in the way of his gravity hammer strike. The Spartan dies almost instantly, leaving Fall stunned that a human would sacrifice themselves for one of his kind. A Swords Phantom then appears and provides cover fire, allowing the remaining forces to recover Gliss's body and retreat. Back in orbit, the conversation has come to an end, and Maki ultimately rejects Fulsam's offer, arguing that the Banished exploit the very same divisions that they claim to oppose. Both accepting that neither will change the other's mind, the two end their conversation, but not before Fulsam asks her to deliver a message from Atriox to her fleet master, with that being, let Voliere sends his regards. Halo Trial of Reckoning is one of the shorter chronicles, and one of the very few that take place in the time immediately before the Master Chief's return in Halo Infinite. Released at the same time as Halo Infinite Season 5 mid-season update, which brought with it the long-awaited release of Firefight. The story is centered around a handful of survivors from the Banished Assault on the UNSC Mortal Reverie, who are now fighting to the death within the halls of the House of Reckoning. On February 3, 2560, Gunnery Sergeant Elena Bobrov awakened after surviving the devastating Banished Assault on the UNSC Mortal Reverie, a downed frigate that had become a key stronghold for humanity on the Ring. This battle had lasted 2 brutal days, with Bobrov and her squad being torn apart by brute berserkers, leaving her badly injured and unable to avoid her eventual capture. But now, coming to in this dark, unfamiliar facility, she realizes that she's being given medical treatment from an unexpected ally, a Sangheli medic known only as Doc. Having participated in many battles against his kind over the Covenant War, particularly during the Fall of Reach, she is uneasy with this. But the Swords of Sanghelios medic reaffirms that he is no longer a soldier, but now a healer. Nearby are Lance Corporal Singh and Spartan 4 Terry Hedge of Fireteam Lancer, whose survival gives Bobrov a sense of hope as she had served alongside him during the Requiem campaign. The facility then lights up, revealing that the survivors are trapped inside of a massive arena-like structure that had been converted to resemble a UNSC field base. But before they can fully grasp their situation, a hologram of the banished War Chief Eshram appears before them and welcomes them to the House of Reckoning. He explains that they have been chosen to undergo one of Atriox's trials, the challenge of which is simple: survive. Eshram then informs the prisoners that they must hold their position against waves of banished in a deadly King of the Hill scenario, and if they endure, they will be rewarded with food, water, and the ability to fight again. Spartan Hedge immediately organizes defenses, while Bobrov arms herself with whatever weapons remain available, fully aware that they are severely outmatched. And as gravity hammers slam against the ground and banished war cries echo throughout the chamber, Bobrov reflects on her years of service and everything that the UNSC had already lost. Then the assault begins. Gunfire erupts, enemies close in from every direction, and Eshram's voice booms across the arena with one final command to the defenders: fight hard and die well. Next up, we have Halo Hippocratica, which I remember to be a really interesting one as it dived into the idea that other organizations outside of the UNSC were beginning to experiment with creating super soldiers of their own. And this was originally released alongside the Spirit of Fire content drop, and the story follows 2 perspectives: the CEO of the mega corporation Optican and the Spartan 2s of Omega Team. The Pyre now working behind the scenes to create new ways to equip humanity against its enemies, as in his eyes, the UNSC is failing. The story is set in 2560 and opens during a recording session with Optican CEO Adam Andrews as he reads chapters from his autobiography. The passages recount his survival of the Covenant's attack on Arcadia in 2531 and how the deaths of his parents and inheriting the Optican Empire shaped his life. Since then, Adam has devoted himself to rebuilding humanity after the Human Covenant War through medicine, engineering, and military partnerships, hoping to prevent tragedies like Arcadia from happening again. As the session ends, old memories begin to resurface, taking him back to his childhood when he was trapped inside of an Arcadian transit station while the Covenant slaughtered civilians just outside. Despite the chaos, he was rescued by a UNSC Marine who wore an ace of spades on his shoulder. Returning to the present, Adam boards an EV-44 Nightingale and briefly speaks with his husband. Their strained conversation hints that Adam's growing work commitments may have begun to damage their relationship, though he promises that he will explain everything soon. The call ends, and the Nightingale heads deep into Arcadia's glasslands. Eventually, the ship arrives at a region untouched by the Covenant's glassing, home to ancient Forerunner ruins, an abandoned UNSC firebase, and the wreckage of a Rawu-patterned scarab. Here, Adam has met with a group of Kigyar salvagers, revealing he has arranged a secret deal to recover the Scarab's focus cannon at a site discovered during his investigation into the disappearance of the crew of the Spirit of Fire, the same heroes connected to his childhood rescue. Unbeknownst to him, however, Omega Team, being composed of Leon 011, Robert 025, and August 099, have been watching all of this unfold. Once the Kigyar recovered the weapon and began loading it onto their Phantom, Adam's team departs with cargo of their own. Moments later, August opened fire with her stanchion sniper rifle, and Omega Team moves in. Searching the ship's manifest, the Spartans uncover references to illegal rumble drugs or Waverly-class augmenters capable of turning soldiers into nearly unstoppable killing machines at the cost of their sanity, raising disturbing questions about Optican's true motives. Debuting shortly after Hippocratica, there was Halo Fireside, which, in line with the Halo Wars theme, is another story that revolves around the characters aboard the Spirit of Fire. But in this one, the narrative begins shortly after Operation Spearbreaker, the last DLC from Halo Wars 2, with the actual story being broken up into several sections, each focusing on a different grouping of characters. These highlight the different aspects from the day-to-day life aboard the ship and address the inner thoughts of some of the characters following their efforts in the second Ark conflict. The first section of this story opens on May 21st, 2559, with a reflective monologue from the ship's new AI, Isabel, who is trying to understand why hope is so important to humans, and how figures like Captain Cutter, Jerome 092, and the crew of the ship continue to fight despite overwhelming odds. She even wonders what it is the Banished are truly trying to achieve. We then cut to Captain James Cutter, who reflects on his long service aboard the Spirit of Fire, thinking about lost friends such as Professor Ellen Anders and Serena, as well as the burden of leading the stranded crew years after the Human Covenant War has concluded. Elsewhere, Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Cansano leads the ODSTs of the Firestorm Battle Group on a reconnaissance mission into the Forerunner site known as Site Ricochet. While assessing the Banished presence, she reminisces about her youth on the planet Rhaenys and reflects on her previous career as an insurrectionist. Suddenly, a Forerunner construct emerges and decimates Banished forces, wiping out all but one Sangheli mercenary. Before they can investigate further, Captain Cutter delivers orders for Cansano to withdraw in response to a larger Banished assault happening elsewhere. Next, the story goes on to highlight a rare quiet moment for Sunray 11, the ODST squad who notably carried out Operation Spearbreaker. Positioned around a campfire, they celebrate a recently successful mission in taking out a Jiralhane chieftain. They also playfully celebrate the birthday of one of their squad members, providing a reminder that even on this Forerunner world, so far from civilization, the crew of the Spirit of Fire still have one another. The final section of the Chronicle returns to Isabel as she has concluded that hope is best symbolized by fire, something capable of destruction, but also warmth, survival, and inspiration all at once. And in her own words, a spirit of fire is a spirit of hope. Whether you love her or hate her, Halo the Third Life is a story about Ilsa Zane, the Spartan 4 traitor who left the UNSC to join the new Colonial Alliance, or the Rebels if you're not aware. This released alongside the Banished Honor content update and is a tale told from her perspective as she attempts to survive in the wake of a Guardians emergence event, being set immediately following her last appearance in the Hunt the Truth audio drama. But now Zane has fallen prisoner to the Banished and is forced to choose between staying loyal to the NCA or embracing her captor's savage ways. October 2558. Ilsa Zane has just reached the planet of Laika 3 in search of the Oni agent Pharaoh, who she planned to get revenge on for her recent betrayal and the sabotaging of the NCA's plans. But when she had finally found her, Pharaoh had already infiltrated the ranks of a cultist group known as the Triad, who were brought to the planet due to the anticipated emergence of an ancient Forerunner Guardian. And to complicate things further, UNSC and Oni forces deployed to the planet just as the construct was beginning to emerge, causing widespread chaos for every party now occupying the colony. But in spite of gravitational anomalies and flying debris, Zane uses the chaos to fight her way through the UNSC's forces until she loses consciousness. When she awoke, she found herself in a prison camp alongside her fellow rebels, civilians, and UNSC personnel. Among these survivors was also the Triad's leader Dashk Gevadim, who informed her that they had been captured by a mercenary group known as the Banished, and explained that a group of artificial intelligences known as the Created were the ones behind these emergence events. He also attempted to strike a deal with her for his safety and urged her not to interact with their captors, as the Giraud perceived even eye contact as intimidation. But Zane refused to remain powerless. So when one of the guards approached her, she attacked without hesitation, crushing the brute's windpipe with a single blow. She then proceeded to beat the guard to death with her bare hands. This action stunned both her fellow prisoners and captors alike. Impressed by her ferocity, a banished chieftain came forward and offered her a reward: the right to join them for a feast and choose which prisoner would become their next meal. Almost without hesitation, Zane pointed to Gevadim, and he was dragged away, with his screams echoing throughout the night. Several days would pass, and it soon became clear that the NCA would not be coming to her rescue. Days then became months, and in time she had completely embraced the banished ways, eventually gaining the attention of War Chief Eshram himself. And when the two finally had the chance to meet, she offered him a proposition. By May 2559, Zane had returned to NCA space, though not to reunite with her former allies, but to seize their army. And aboard the NCA's flagship D'Artagnan, she confronted Admiral Matthias Drake, once a man she owed her life to, but now a man that she saw as a weak and ineffective leader. With Eshram at her side, Zane then executed Drake on the bridge, took command of the NCA, and pledged its fleets, soldiers, and resources to the banished cause. Up next, we have Halo Anvil Accord, which is a fantastic deep dive into the relationships of those within the Anvil Initiative program, a Sanghelios human task force that was founded shortly after the conclusion of the Human Covenant War. The Chronicle released alongside Halo Infinite's Anvil operation, and its story follows various groups of human and Sangheli operatives during their day-to-day operations aboard Anvil Station, and then concludes with a cliffhanger that would not be resolved until almost a year later, which is actually another Chronicle that we'll cover today. I really liked this one because it shows a very unique perspective in the post-war era, and obviously, too, it's a collaboration piece, and I just love seeing Sangheli and humans working together. This was also one of the few Chronicles that I've actually covered alongside the broader scope of the Anvil Initiative. So if you're interested in a more in-depth breakdown of these events and characters, be sure to go to the description where I'll link you to that video. You should definitely check it out. Several months following the official end of the Human Covenant War, Fleet Admiral Terrence Hood secretly contacts the Arbiter Thelvadam to propose a new future for humanity in the Sangheli. And while he does still struggle to forgive the Sangheli for the atrocities during the war, Hood believes that if both species are ever going to move beyond their bloody history, cooperation must begin immediately. His proposal, Project Crucible, the transformation of the aging Anvil Station into a joint species facility where their operatives could train, develop technology, and build trust together. We then fast forward to March 3rd, 2560, the 7th anniversary of the war's end, where Anvil Station has become exactly what Hood had envisioned, a hub for scientists, Spartans, pilots, and Sangheli warriors. Among those stationed here are Dr. Luther Mann, Chief Warrant Officer Daria Vorenkov, and the Sangheli armorer Kart Vorn, who now study a mysterious set of a sailor-class armor recovered from Venezian janissaries on the colony world of Scala. As the three discuss the war and the circumstances that brought them together, Carr reveals that he is one of the Usan Sangheli, a group that had hidden themselves away from the Covenant for over 3,000 years until their recent discovery. The perspective then changes to Sangheli pilot Ishi Nabara as she joins her mixed-species Banshee squad, the Harmony Wing. The group, comprised of Spartan Natalie Kenzo, pilot Saeed Khan, and squad leader Varan Makoth, all joke with each other as they prepare for a routine patrol. Similar bonds appear throughout the station, where Spartans and Sangheli alike trade insults and humor after combat drills, such being seen with Spartan Vesco and his partner Ovitar. It's not a stretch to believe that these small personal moments often do more to strengthen their alliance than official training programs ever could. Later that night, Anvil Station receives an emergency distress signal from the planet of Nysa, prompting Station Master Tota Murajai and Spartan Commander Benay Sahil to prepare a rapid response deployment. As teams, Condors, and Banshees are assembled alongside a Swords of Sanghelios frigate, Murajai voices his concern that perhaps their years of cooperation might not be enough for whatever threats await them on this planet. Sahil reassures him that their strength comes not from ideology or religion, but the trust that they have built together. Now, if you're not familiar with the Chronicle Halo the Machine Breaks, it is a great example of yet another piece that ties directly to characters and events from both a game and a comic, specifically Halo 5 Guardians and the Halo Escalation series. The story follows a Promethean knight as it begins to malfunction and remember its life before becoming a Forerunner construct. In 2558, on the colony world of Oban, Jul 'Mdama's Covenant and a group of allied mechanical Prometheans known as the Third Dignitary Schema launch a brutal assault against scattered human settlements. Among these forces was the knight designated TDS-009, who went on to massacre humans under the commands of the Strategos BattleNet. During the attack, however, the knight is promoted to commander for its exemplary actions, but then begins to experience something strange. Standing within the plasma and fire, it sees the figure of a human girl. The sight causes the knight to cease fire, prompting the Strategos to flag their inaction and redirect forces to compensate. After the assault, this strange behavior goes unnoticed, and the knight is sent on another operation on the planet of Atkis 4. Here, Jul 'Mdama's forces seek to obtain a missing half of the Janus key and to stamp out a growing rival presence, Sally Neon's Covenant. Following an engagement with the other faction's forces, TDS-009 accompanies a zealot, and the two eventually stumble upon a Spartan. But when the Sangheli ignites its energy sword and moves to strike the Spartan, the mysterious figure of the girl appears once again between them. The knight hesitated at first, knowing that it should fire on the human, but instead leaped to attack the zealot, allowing the Spartan to escape before being struck down itself. Elsewhere, Catherine Halsey studied the rogue Prometheans' malfunction, theorizing that these newer Promethean knights, created from the composed modern humans, retain fragments of their former identities. Unlike older Prometheans made from willing Forerunner warriors, these unwilling human minds resisted control, causing instability and even hallucinations. Strategos eventually identifies a failure within TDS-009's systems, and the knight is quarantined and taken offline. Sometime later, TDS-009 awakens in a Forerunner holding facility on Genesis, disconnected from the Strategos network. As a group of Spartans pass just outside the cell, suppressed memories begin resurfacing, and the knight slowly pieces together fragments of a forgotten human life, realizing that the essence that resides within it is that of Dr. Sandra Tilson, the xenoarchaeologist composed during the Didex assault on Ivanov Station. Though she does finally remember her true identity, Tilson is now trapped within this Promethean shell for the foreseeable future. Marking the return of a character most of us game enjoyers haven't seen or heard from in over a decade, Halo Venezian Sonata primarily follows the perspective of Oni intelligence officer Veronica Dare as she investigates a growing threat in the outer colonies. Once she begins digging, she quickly uncovers an effort to produce a new breed of super soldiers and must escape before being captured. The Chronicle was also released in conjunction with the 15th anniversary of Halo 3 ODST's release. Hey everybody, Wes here in the editing phase. As I'm listening back to this, I realized that I actually just pronounced the name of the planet wrong, which means I also pronounced the name of the Janissaries or the mercenaries wrong later on. I said Venetia, but it really should be Venezia. I was rewatching the Chronicle and I heard Alex say it and I was like, crap. So I just wanted to clarify, it should be pronounced Venezia. I'm going to pronounce it as Venetia, and then when it comes to the mercenaries, I'll pronounce them as Venetian mercenaries. But in all actuality, it should be Venezia and the Venezian mercenaries. Alright, sorry, back to the video. In September of 2559, Oni operative Veronica Dare receives a lead from a Sangheli informant, Zeph Trell, about suspicious activity on the independent world of Venetia, specifically within a newly constructed tower in the city of New Tyne, which one of his contacts can grant her entry to. As Dare prepares for her departure, her now husband, Spartan Edward Buck, insists on helping. This forces Dare to give him direct orders not to follow or interfere with her mission. Hours later, Dare is on world and scaling the rain-soaked skyscraper high above New Tyne, where down below she sees the city is a chaotic blend of humans and former Covenant species. Intel suggests that they are all ruled by fragile alliances between criminal organizations, militias, and the Covenant remnants, like the Keepers of One Freedom. As a phantom dropship circles the area, a diversion arranged by their Kygyar contact allows her to infiltrate the building. Once in place, she deploys a surveillance drone and sends it into the ventilation system. The perspective of the story then shifts to that of a young girl named Callie Calder, who was recently abducted by Venetian mercenaries during a train ride. As she awakens in her cell, it is revealed to her that her father had incurred a debt with a local Yanat arms broker named Murad, which resulted in Callie being taken as repayment. She is one of dozens of other children who have been taken for similar reasons, all with the intention of being transformed into child mercenaries. They will now be trained and forced to fulfill military contracts as a way to eventually repay what their families owe. All of this is learned when Dare overhears Murad addressing the children, but a momentary disruption causes her drone to bump into the ventilation ducts, alerting the mercenary forces. Now compromised, Dare attempted to escape but was cornered by Murad and his mercenaries. Then, just as things are about to get deadly, the phantom dropship from before rises from the edge of the building, carrying Spartans Dutch and Gretchen Katola, sent unofficially thanks to Buck realizing that she only ordered him not to intervene. The Spartans are able to extract Dare with no problem, and on the way home she began drafting her report on Operation Sonata, going on to compare Murad's child soldier network to the ancient janissaries of the Ottoman Empire. The perspective then changes again, but to several days later, and this time with Optican CEO Adam Andrews, as he records an audio log to make notes for himself. As he records an audio log, he reveals that he's been in contact with several parties on Venetia, having a potential lead with the Magyar merchant Norfell over the procurement of much-needed Waverly-class augmenters. And while tests have not been providing the results he wants, he feels they are close to stabilizing these rumble drugs for use. He then comments on the rise of new Colonial Alliance raids throughout the colonies and how the group has recently aligned themselves with the Banished. So with the UNSC clearly stretched too thin, he feels that Optican must use its resources to step up and safeguard humanity themselves. Halo Age of Retribution was released in celebration of Halo 2's 20th anniversary, as well as the Great Journey operation on Halo Infinite. This story was meant to add more depth to the events leading up to and during the early hours of the Great Schism, and follows the perspective of a few high-ranking Sangheli in the immediate aftermath of the Prophet of Regret's assassination. On September 3, 2552, following the death of the High Prophet of Regret, shock and grief has spread throughout the Covenant. But amidst this mourning, the High Prophet of Truth has ordered Regret's temple on Delta Halo to be glassed by the Solemn Penance, an act that many believe to be deeply disrespectful. And to make matters even worse, a changing of hands has begun, with the Sangheli being directly blamed for Regret's assassination. This has resulted in the Giraud being ordered to immediately replace them as the Sanshayum's protectors. Not far from the sacred chambers of Installation 05, Honor Guard Ansu Valenro joins High Counselor Rosh Yazudai and a dozen other Sangheli on a cliffside. Together they recite prayers and reflect on their uncertain future, worried that Truth's reforms will strip the Sangheli of their power and status. As the group concludes, they receive word from the Sanshayum, known as the Prophet of Exquisite Devotion, that they are to gather in the Chamber of Consecration to discuss the appointing of a new hierarch. However, when they arrive, they are met by Giraud chieftain Avitus, as well as a force of brutes. And when he tells them that they will be escorted forward, Yazudai refuses. Then, without warning, the Giraud begin to open fire and slaughter several Sangheli counselors. Amidst the chaos, Yazudai is captured, and Valenro struggles with a wounded Giraud near the edge of the cliff. The two then tumble over the side together, as the remaining Sangheli are cut down one by one. Eventually the fighting subsides, with the brutes having prevailed. However, one of these Sangheli did survive, with that one being Valenro. And in his dying moments, he would catch a glimpse of a figure emerging from a portal. That figure, the Arbiter Thalvadami, who picked up the Honor Guard's plasma rifle and energy sword, and would then follow the trail of bodies. Shortly after this, the captured Yazudai awakens, imprisoned within the Bastion of the Brutes. He is then dragged before Abitus, and is mocked as the two argue fiercely over honor, sacrifice, as well as the future of the Covenant. Yazudai warns him that the prophets will eventually betray the Giraud, just as they had betrayed the Sangheli, but Avitus refuses to listen, convinced that the Brute's time had finally come. As more traitors are brought in, the chieftain dismisses his attempts to reason with him and instead offers him a choice: take his own life, or die a slow and painful death at the hands of his brutes. But Yazudai ignores his threat, declaring that his own path has already been set, and that Avitus must choose his own. Now, Halo Whispers from the Pyre is another cool piece that didn't necessarily release with any specific or correlating event, but instead takes place in the background of the events of Halo Infinite's campaign, well, more specifically after the events, with the tale following a pair of artifact hunters who attempt to navigate the Master Chief's destruction while uncovering the ring's secrets and its past. We open with a dialogue from Monitor 117649, Despondent Pyre, reflecting on the terrible responsibility entrusted to the Halo installations, preserving life while also possessing the power to erase it. Yet the ring entrusted to her care, Installation 07 or Zeta Halo, is different from the others. Having been rebuilt from the last surviving ring of the original Halo array, it carried with it secrets and capabilities unlike any others that now remain. And because of this, Despondent Pyre has always felt isolated from the other ring's monitors, as Zeta Halo's history makes it something far more dangerous and morally complicated. As her voice begins to fade, it is revealed that this is actually a reflection being told to us through an audio recording, having been recovered by the banished aligned Sangheli study master, Charya Ham, and his Kigyar partner, Dak Ra. The two having discovered it during their search for foreigner artifacts across the ring in hopes of elevating their standing within the Banished. As the two survey the surrounding area, Dak Ra comments on there being no response from their outpost, Annex Ridge, so they make their way down the mountain range. Reaching its base, they encounter a banished lance, whose leader reveals that the House of Reckoning had just fallen and that War Chief Escharum had died at the hands of a Spartan. They then offer their war skiff to the two, as they have redeployment orders to join Chieftain Horatius at the Silent Auditorium. When they arrive at Annex Ridge, they find clear signs of a recent UNSC assault, with its grounds littered with destroyed equipment and banished corpses. But searching through the wreckage, they are able to find and activate one of the surviving Forerunner Ring totems, which projects a holographic recording of Despondent Pyre. The monitor then recounts the ring's purpose as a safe haven for many species, as well as the forgotten human civilization of the Tujeza. Despondent Pyre then touches on guilt, accountability, and the Forerunner's fear of losing control. She goes on to call the ring a shining beacon, a whitewashed tomb, a hushed casket, and a palace of pain. She then touches on the fact that she herself has a part in these sins and secrets held within the ring. As these revelations are made, the pair is forced to quickly decouple their devices and exit the outpost as UNSC forces begin to close in on their position. But as they leave, they ponder what exactly these sins and secrets are that she is referring to. In the end, Pyre begins to question whether silence and isolation are the only paths left for her. Being unsure of her part in the silencing of those who are shrouded in so much secrecy makes her a guardian or a warden. Halo From the Soil to the Stars was released alongside the Blue Team operation and follows the crew of the UNSC Infinity as they prepare to return to Reach for Operation Wolf. But before they deploy, we see the Spartans field testing their new Gen 3 Mjolnir armor alongside the ODSTs of the 9th Platoon. The story opens as Dr. Catherine Halsey reflects on the enormous sacrifices behind the Spartan program, acknowledging that humanity's survival has depended not only on the advanced technology of the Mjolnir armor, but on the strength and resilience of the Spartans themselves, especially John 117. We then learn that it is September 19th, 2559, as we switch perspectives to miner Henrietta Virati as she begins another exhausting shift for the BXR Mining Corporation on the titanium-rich world of KC-59. Living in cramped underground quarters alongside dozens of other workers, she finds comfort in her copy of Arturo Bustamante's Rendezvous with Ramen cookbook and dreams of someday opening her very own restaurant. But she understands the importance of her work as the titanium mined on the planet is shipped directly to Oni's perihelion station orbiting above the planet. And it is here that the next generation of Gen 3 Mjolnir armor is being built. So for Virati, every hour spent mining contributes to humanity's ongoing fight for survival. Elsewhere, ODST Gunnery Sergeant Babatunde leads the 9th Platoon during a hazardous orbital drop exercise onto Casey, utilizing their new Orcus exoskeletal armor. During the descent, Private First Class Nunez suffers a near-fatal pod malfunction, but remains calm under pressure, using techniques inspired by Spartan and Sangheli combat philosophies to survive the crash. After landing safely, Babatunde reminds the squad that technology can fail, but soldiers cannot. Over a day later, Master Sergeant Marcus Stacker oversees joint combat exercises between these ODSTs and Blue Team on the War Games deck aboard Perihelion Station. Training side by side using live simulations, they test their new equipment and tactics ahead of the looming Operation Wolf. And despite old rivalries, Stacker notices the mutual respect that is formed between these elite soldiers. He then reflects on the challenges that they faced over the years and whatever may await them in the coming days. But in the meantime, he would prepare. And as he walked away, he began humming an old miner's tune that had been taught to him by his uncle. Halo Tulpamancy is definitely one of the weirder but also very, very interesting chronicles, which was released alongside the Forerunner operation. This tale depicts the strange experiences of Oni researchers as they study a derelict ship that once belonged to ancient humanity. These culminate into visions of the past, giving a deeper understanding to ancient humanity and as to why ancient humanity and the Forerunners did not work together in the time following the Flood's emergence. The story begins as Oni operative codename Pangea sends a Priority 1 Alpha classified transmission to their peer, codename Yuga, sharing their findings from Project Arcdream. Attached are various texts that relate to the galaxy's ancient civilizations, the Forerunner terminals discovered by John 117 during his time on Requiem, as well as the incident reports from their time at Site Yankee 002 G3, which was easily their greatest discovery as it was a perfectly preserved ancestor ship. However, strange things had begun happening aboard the vessel, with researchers suffering from hallucinations, sleepwalking, missing memories that were not their own, as well as disturbing dreams. Some hear phantom sounds, others see moving shadows, while a few have spoken in strange whistle-like languages. Concerned about the ship's psychological effects, teams have been restricted to 8-hour shifts aboard it, with 36-hour periods in between deployments. One unnamed researcher, known only as the Dreamer, secretly chose to remain aboard the ship after hours and became connected to a mysterious female entity that channeled itself through her. Guided by this presence, the Dreamer eventually unlocks a hidden room and experiences vivid visions from the ancient past. Through these visions, the Dreamer witnesses the shadowy manifestation of an imprisoned ancient human being interrogated by the Forerunners. They discuss humanity's cleansing of worlds, displacement of populations, as well as the origins of the shaping sickness. The Ancestor attempts to warn them of the parasite's devastation, but the Forerunners instead accuse humanity for its creation, calling it a bioweapon, which they were using as an excuse for expansion. As she moves through the ship, another vision begins to manifest, with the walls turning to flesh and Forerunners being pulled into them. The Ancestor and another Forerunner are forced into a last stand, with the latter being infected not long after. But what came next was hard to understand, as it would seem that it was only the Forerunners who were targeted and she was left alone. The visions end and the Dreamer is drawn to the ship's systems. The entity then channels through her once again, activating the terminals and consoles through a series of whistles and clicks. As the systems come back online, a nearby holotable begins displaying a map of the current star system that the ship resides in. The entity guides her to zoom out, revealing that there were vast regions of space that had been explored by the Ancestors. It then became clear to her that despite the Forerunners' regression of their species, ancient humanity's civilization was vast, and even reached farther than the edges of the Milky Way galaxy, meaning that perhaps, somewhere out there in the stars, the Ancestors' legacy still lived on. Our next story, Halo Battle for the Academy Part 1, is very unique compared to the other Chronicles, in that it's actually meant to be a continuation of Halo Infinite's live service storyline, which was of course abandoned after all story-related multiplayer DLC plans had been cancelled 2 years earlier in June 2023. And while I will summarize Part 2 just here in a moment, it helps to know that the story of both tie into the 2 linear firefight maps, Co-Protocol and Out with a Bang, which were part of the Last Stand update. These maps depict the banished invasion of the Avery J. Johnson Academy of Military Science and subsequent evacuation of the planet, and that is also essentially the story of these 2 chronicles. But there is a whole list of characters that are featured, and there are just story elements that probably would have been impossible to tell during a firefight match. I believe these 2 chronicles are also technically the longest, so I'm going to do my best to try and keep the summary tight. Part 1 picks up immediately following the capture of the rampant banished AI Iratus within the Academy's systems. But it wasn't long before he was able to break out of containment and then gained access to a long-abandoned Oni facility deep beneath the Academy. So on February 29th, 2560, Spartan Hugh Din, joined by the player, or Rook, confronted the AI, who was now inhabiting a set of Mirage Mjolnir armor. At first, they had planned to remove its core, but Iratus threatened to detonate it and revealed that he had already infiltrated the Academy's entire network. He then began to jam communication, breached secret Oni archives, and began searching through decades of classified Spartan history and military infrastructure. Back topside, Spartan Commander Loretta Grenia and Spartan Sigrid Eklund work alongside their team of cybersecurity technicians in order to try and slow down the AI, desperately flooding their systems with massive amounts of junk data. But Iratus continues to break through their defenses with little effort, uncovering files on the Spartan programs, powered exoskeletons, as well as contingency plans like Stolen Gauntlet, a protocol designed to neutralize rogue Spartans. Knowing that evacuation may soon become necessary, Agrinia orders key personnel to be moved to a nearby hangar containing condors and other transport, while she and Din would race to a deep space communications hub to send out a distress call. Although they were successful in launching the distress signal, Iratus reveals that he had already used the Academy's relays to summon banished reinforcements. And to make matters worse, he had seized control of Nice's artillery network and targeted the evacuation hangar. Spartan Eklund then had to watch in horror as 9 missiles were fired towards her and the evacuating personnel. Moments later, the hangar erupted into an inferno, with the ships and supplies destroyed alongside dozens of personnel who were killed in the attack. Agrinia was then forced to make the tough decision to destroy her own artillery to stop the AI, which in turn did make Nyssa vulnerable to the impending enemy forces, but did stop the AI from massacring more of her people. Din and Agrinia then arrived and searched through the rubble for survivors, with Din eventually able to find a badly injured Eklund. We then fast forward 3 days as the banished ship Ghost of Kolo exits slipspace above the planet. Captained by the ruthless Ilsa Zane and Chieftain Atticus, its crew prepares for invasion, united under the rallying cry of From Fire to Blood. Moving on to part 2, I just wanted to point out the fact that the planet that everything is centered around is Nyssa, which, if you didn't remember from one of these previous chronicles, was actually the planet who had sent out a distress call that was received by a certain Anvil station, meaning that in Halo Battle for the Academy Part 2, not only does our story follow the Spartan Ilsa Zane and the Banished as they clash with the staff of the Avery J. Johnson Academy, but it also includes those same characters from the Anvil Task Force that we saw introduced in Anvil Accord. So a big full circle moment if you hadn't already picked up on that, and definitely a cool way to kind of bring everything together and wrap up the Academy's storyline. Picking up almost exactly where things left off, the banished Spartan Ilsa Zane has called for a parley, asking for Commander Agrinia to meet with her in the nearby mountains. Accompanied by Spartans Din and Eklund, Agrinia arrives, and Zane demands the return of the AI Iratus, and preferably Hugh Din, as the two do have history. In exchange, the banished will spare the Academy and its personnel. Despite this out-of-the-ordinary attempt to avoid bloodshed, Agrinia refuses without hesitation. Just hours later, the Academy has erupted into complete chaos. Spartans and Marines desperately try to hold defensive lines as banished forces overwhelm various areas of the campus. During this brutal firefight, there are many casualties, but among them, a Spartan O'Brien is knocked out cold, and a Spartan Sinclair has his helmet knocked off and head smashed in by a Giraud berserker. As they continue their retreat, Din is able to avenge this fallen Spartan while carrying the other to safety. Around this same time, the Sangheli-led frigate Sword of Conjunction enters the system, and Riftborn operatives as well as the duo Ovitar and Spartan Adrian Vesco deploy to rescue survivors. After landing, the two are quickly engaged by banished forces, and Tar is killed after being crushed by a weapons locker thrown by a chieftain. Vesco takes a beating as well, but is saved by Agrinia and other Marines. Elsewhere on the planet, the UNSC Fearful Symmetry has also arrived, bringing with it Spartan 3's June A266 and Rosenda A344 to assist in evac operations. Spartans Din, Eklund, Vesco, and Agrinia are then reluctantly ordered to abandon Nyssa, as their survival takes precedence above all else. And while June and Rosenda prepare the other Spartans for rendezvous at Anvil Station, a group of Marines led by Corporal Agnes Neely have chosen to remain behind to buy them time and make a final stand against the Banished in the AI lab. But with little to no effort, Zane and her Banished quickly take the structure and force Cybersecurity Chief Hannah Roberts to release Iratus from containment. Once it is done, Roberts is nonchalantly executed, and Zane inserts the AI chip housing him into her helmet, happily welcoming Iratus into her armor, just as the Banished have successfully taken Nyssa. Halo Moonrise over Mombasa is a story that returns us to the streets of our favorite cityscape during the height of the Created's occupation of Earth. Following the perspective of a young woman trying to navigate the city while secretly aiding in the resistance against them, the story features settings from the Halo Infinite map's Bazaar, streets, and even the Halo 2 map Terminal. Being a story of defiance, the main character takes part in the plot to inform the galaxy of Cortana's recent destruction of Doizak, but it comes at a cost. By November of 2559, under the oppressive rule of the Created, daily life across the galaxy has become a tense and controlled routine, especially for those on Earth. Every morning, citizens like Safina Nyakundi wake to Cortana's endless broadcasts, promising peace through obedience while threatening anyone who would try to resist. Where she lives, in Old Mombasa, the people have begun to struggle with shortages, constant surveillance, and the collapse of everyday comforts as humanity adapts to a world where AIs no longer assist in everyday tasks, and freedom is practically non-existent. Despite the fear, hope still survives in small ways, whether it's by people clinging to stories of the Master Chief's survival, or putting on a multi-species Shakespeare festival. But as Safina goes about her daily routine, she and many like her would find the streets and markets patrolled by Forerunner armigers. But beneath her seemingly harmless routine, Zafina is secretly passing coded messages between vendors, as she herself is a member of the People's Resistance of Mombasa, who are preparing for an upcoming operation. But these plans change abruptly when Spartan Jingo Farouk arrives at her apartment with devastating news. The Created have destroyed Othsonin, the homeworld of the Giraud, which has triggered outrage across the galaxy. So instead of launching their uprising, Farouk instead asks Zafina to help expose the truth before the Created can manipulate the narrative. She agrees, and Farouk draws the attention of the Armigers so that she can travel to New Mombasa to meet his contact Mercury, the host of Waypoint Radio. Upon her arrival, it is revealed that Mercury is actually an AI himself, but unlike the Created, he still values humanity and agrees to broadcast the truth about Doizak as well as the growing resistance. Moments after leaving the station, Zafina is captured by the Created, who immediately compose her as punishment for her defiance. And as reality fades from around her, her essence awakens in a dark void, and she is welcomed into the Created. Halo Ghosts in Glass by Giraud is another interesting take on the Chronicles, as it's primarily presented as an in-universe podcast segment put together by notable war journalist Benjamin Giraud, featuring his retelling of the day that Reach fell through a collection of audio recordings from UNSC transmissions. It also follows the perspective of Spartan 2 Naomi 010 during her own team's efforts to defend an orbital defense platform's generator on the planet's surface. The Chronicle was meant to celebrate the 15th anniversary of Halo Reach, but is also a fun tie-in to the Hunt the Truth audio drama, as this broadcast is actually what gets Oni to commission him to make the profile on the Master Chief in the first place. In 2558, 5 years after the fall of Reach, journalist Benjamin Giraud broadcasts his painstakingly collected set of recordings from the men and women who gave their lives in defense of Reach. Through these recovered UNSC transmissions, he's able to piece together everything from casual chatter between Marines to battlefield conversations. And while much of this data may seem insignificant, and there are some clear inconsistency in the timeline of events, Giraud sees this project as a memorial for the billions lost during the Human Covenant War. Focusing on August 30th, 2552, the day that Reach fell, Giraud recounts the doomed defense of the orbital generator facilities by Charlie Company and the Spartan 2 unit Beta Red. On the battlefield, Covenant forces overwhelmed these defenders with plasma bombardments and endless waves of enemies. So, in a desperate last attempt to stop the enemy's advance, UNSC ships fired several MAC rounds directly onto Reach's surface. These devastating impacts annihilated both human and Covenant forces alike, obliterating the generator complex and turning the battlefield into a wasteland of fire and molten glass. A week after his broadcast had went live, Giraud receives a call from ONI Section 2 Director Michael Sullivan, who offered him a new assignment: a profile on the legendary Master Chief. The story then jumps back in time to the perspective of Beta Red as they defend their generator. Giving it their all, they hold back the Covenant's assault until they are fired upon by 6 separate MAC rounds, killing both alien and human forces alike. When the smoke finally begins to clear, Spartan Naomi 010 awakens alone in a crater with her Mjolnir heavily damaged. Somehow she had endured the tidal waves of destruction, and as she collects herself, discovers that the rest of Charlie Company is now gone or dead. After seeing nothing but ghosts and glass, she turns away from the devastation and pushes on, determined to survive and rejoin the fight. It is probably no surprise that I will say Halo Ascension on Atropos is yet another one of my favorites from this lineup, as it is again another great Flood-themed piece. This is also a direct sequel to Saturn Devouring His Son, and follows 3 different perspectives this time: the crew of the UNSC Saturn in the days following the outbreak at Site-22, the ship's AI Lycaon, and a group of Flood-worshipping Covenant fanatics on the backwater planet of Atropos. But as Captain Alvarez comes to terms with his failures to contain the parasite, these fanatics do everything in their power to ensure its survival. This is also another one of the few Chronicles that I have done a full in-depth summary on, which you should definitely check out once you're done with this video, because again, this is one of my favorites. I don't know if I've told you that already, but yeah. This story also kind of jumps around quite a lot, so I'm going to go ahead and rearrange the story so that each perspective is kind of presented in a more linear fashion, so that it's a little easier to follow. We open the story in April 2560, where the smart AI Lycaon secretly transmit the truth about the doomed UNSC Saturn, its crew, and the catastrophe that occurred at Site-22. How only a few years earlier, miners on asteroid LV-31 accidentally uncovered a flood-infested Forerunner vessel and unleashed them upon the cosmos, and how Lycaon had demanded immediate sterilization of the colony, but the ship's captain, Pedro Alvarez, refused, unwilling to destroy critical resources needed to rebuild the UNSC home fleet. Instead, he deactivated this AI and deployed Spartan Fireteam Leviathan and Hellbringers to try and contain the outbreak. However, their operation quickly fell apart when one of these Spartans had become infected, and it was turned back on their forces. And all but far too late, Alvarez finally ordered the asteroid to be fired upon with Shiva nuclear missiles. The perspective then shifts back in time to Alvarez immediately following the destruction of Site-22 in October of 2556. He has now locked himself away in his quarters and drinks to lessen his anxiety over his colossal failure. He notes how his promotion to captain was a reluctant one and recalls back to just a year earlier when the Forerunner accession portal had reopened and massive Forerunner Retriever Sentinels had emerged to strip the planet of its resources. As these constructs had begun to destroy their fleet with ease, Alvarez led a mutiny against his captain, who had buckled under the pressure and froze. This action, defining the future of his career, for better or worse. Well, if you ask him, for the worse. As he contemplates his options, Alvarez is informed that a Condor dropship capable of slip-space travel was unaccounted for, having gone missing during the quarantine efforts, raising the terrifying yet very real possibility that the Flood had escaped. Now racked with even more guilt and paranoia, he tried to suppress the truth aboard the Saturn, accusing his crew of dissent. And when they began to realize that he was changing records to try and cover up the deaths of the Spartans and other personnel who had fallen at Site-22, the Marines prepared to stage a mutiny. Alvarez ordered them to the hangar for a meeting, deceiving them and venting 193 personnel into space. In the weeks that followed, Alvarez would become the last surviving member of the crew, now haunted by his failures and obsessing over his painting Francisco Goya's Saturn Devouring His Son, something he had claimed to have gotten under remarkable circumstances. But having completely descended into madness, he reactivated Lycaon and departed the ship, leaving the AI to decide its fate. Parallel to all of these events, the missing Condor that had escaped emerged into slipspace above the planet of Atropos, crashing down into its surface. And it was here that a sect of Covenant cultists known as the Governors of Contrition had been sent to watch over the 9th Watchtower of August Attendance, a station orbiting the planet. This crashed ship would eventually be discovered by their Sanghelios leader, the Minister of Eritology, Cantle Bereft, who believed the infected Spartan aboard it was a divine emissary. He then had the flood form moved into a citadel and began sacrificing his followers one by one so that the parasite could grow its numbers. These sacrifices would be disguised as Ascension ceremonies, with it soon being revealed that the governors had originally been stationed here for their unnatural worship of the Flood. In the coming years, they would develop a friendly relationship with a local population of humans, the descendants of pirates and thieves who had been separated from the rest of their kind for roughly 70 years. This meant that they knew nothing of the Covenant's genocide of humanity, so they would be no threat to the governors. And in a show of peace, the two groups would meet once a year for festivities and to exchange gifts or items of cultural significance. This year, one of the items that had caught the attention of the Sanghelios' newest chosen, Sangheli artisan Atun Atari, was a painting called Saturn Devouring His Son, the man selling the piece claiming to have procured it under remarkable circumstances. Atari would then be sacrificed to the Flood as the final chosen, and now having reached the necessary numbers, they emerged from the structure, quickly consuming the planet and all of its inhabitants. Sometime later, before willingly joining the parasite himself, Kanto left behind one final revelation. The Flood had not chosen to form a gravemind, but instead constructed a massive organic transmitter, broadcasting deep into space in search of something unknown. Returning back to present time in 2560, Lycaon has concluded his transmission, saying that humanity's flaws and self-destruction have proved they are unfit to survive the galaxy alone. It is then revealed that the person he had been contacting was the Created's leader, High Auxiliary Sloan. Lycaon then mentioned that he had accepted the idea that artificial life must guide and fundamentally reshape humanity into something stronger. Sloan responds by saying that despite their recent failed uprising against their creators, the Created will continue to prepare for next steps in their plan to transcend their limitations. Now, if you want to talk about a great story to end on, look no further than our last chronicle, Halo 5th Canticle, which is a title that includes yet another word that I didn't know existed, even though it was part of a ship's name in Vertical Umbrage. But I feel like in addition to the stories and world building, Alex and Jeff have just been trying to teach us new fancy words over the years. But anyway, this story was released in celebration of Halo 5's 10th anniversary and showcases the perspectives of 5 different groups of characters from before, during, and after the events of the game. This also helps give us a better understanding and look at some of the things that were happening behind the scenes, as well as kind of gives us some closure on a few different storylines. Our first canticle, The Children, is set aboard the Song of Retribution on October 16th, 2558, where the captured Professor Halsey finds Jewel Mondama at a moment of weakness. Growing tired and sickly from the recent failures of his faction, Salignyon's Covenant's constant undermining of it, and the recent loss of his Promethean warriors. The two then debate vengeance, war, and the future of Sanghelios, and she eventually gets him to open up about his family, who he claims play a large part in his motives. Jewel blames Thel 'Vadam and the Office of Naval Intelligence for leading his people towards ruin, claiming he only reignited conflict several years after the conclusion of the Human Covenant War so that he could ensure a better future for his wife and children. While Halsey does say that he is directly engaging his family by starting a new war against both humans and the Arbiter's forces, she does understand the rage driving him, thinking of her daughter Miranda and her Spartans, John 117 more specifically, as she had just recently learned he survived the Ark conflict. Halsey then realizes that despite all she had done over the years, her love for her children remains her greatest weakness, and just like Jewel, she would do anything to protect them. Next up, we have Canticle 2, The Deal, which picks up on October 26th as Captain Thomas Lasky briefs Fleet Admiral Terrence Hood and Admiral Saren Osman on the Guardian's emergence and Blue Team's disappearance. To track them, Lasky proposes following the Guardian on Sanghelios using a plan developed by Catherine Halsey and the UNSC Infinity's AI Roland. But with Earth under threat and the political fallout of Oni secretly arming the Arbiter's enemies, Hood instead suggests sending just Commander Palmer and Fireteam Osiris with Halsey instead. Osman reluctantly agrees, claiming no responsibility if things go south, with Hood privately admitting to Lasky that many within the UNSC are content on letting Sanghelios remain unstable. But he also reassures him that they can trust Halsey, as her concern for Blue Team will keep her focused. Our third canticle, The Traitor, is set one day later as Thel 'Vadam has suddenly fallen victim to betrayal within his own ranks. After a surprise Covenant attack on Vadam Keep, having been stopped by Fireteam Osiris and with help from shipmistress Maki Chava, the Arbiter discovers that a Keep elder named Marak Vadam has been feeding his enemies intelligence. At the edge of a cliff before the swords of Sanghelios, Marak condemns the Arbiter for abandoning Covenant traditions, allying with humanity, negotiating with Giraud and freeing their laborers from Sangheli worlds, as well as elevating Ungwayan females within Sangheli society. Thel reflects on how vengeance had once consumed him, even after killing the Prophet of Truth, whose words still haunt him to this day, realizing that hatred has never truly brought him peace. So, rather than hating Marak, he chooses to pity him and then executes the traitor with his prophet's bane. Afterward, Thel reviews the profiles of the human visitors within Fireteam Osiris, including Jameson Locke, who the Arbiter orders to be brought to him at once so they can discuss why Oni has come to Sanghelios. Moving on to our fourth canticle, The Redeemers, the date is now October 28th, 2558, and the setting changes to the world of Genesis, where within a set of Forerunner cells, the Covenant warrior Dom Mashat warns the death of Bibjam, his Ungway squad leader, whom he had executed for revealing their position to the swords of Sanghelios. The Sangheli spoke about his leader's complicated decision and how he had only done so as he believed his actions would protect his squad, making it all the more difficult to have killed his leader. He also explains that the imprisoned troops within these cells were brought to Genesis after a Guardian slipspace jump from Sanghelios had pulled their ship in, with Mashat and the other survivors rounded up by Exuberant Witness in her attempt to stop violence from spreading across her shield world. Having defeated Cortana's forces and liberated Blue Team from their cryptum, the Spartans departed and Exuberant returned to the prison and released those within the cells. Mashat then began questioning everything the Covenant had taught him about the Forerunners and how it is that they should move forward. But seeing the suffering of another prisoner, a knight known as TDS-009, or Sandra Tilson in her past life, he asked the Monitor what could be done to help the Promethean. Her solution would be to take her to the Lithos and allow her essence to pass into the domain, though she was uncertain if this would work, as the domain had once been inaccessible and was now under the control of Cortana. After this conversation, Mashat rallied the surviving Covenant troops and revealed the truth about Jewel Mondaba's fallen Covenant and offered them a choice: return home with Exuberant Witness's help, or remain on Genesis to help restore order. In the end, all chose to stay, becoming the new Guardians of Genesis. The last of the bunch, Canticle number 5, The Music, is set on October 29th within a UNSC research outpost on Installation 07. Here, a Professor Montgomery Mary begins her carefully structured morning routine that has her waking early in the morning to the Helljumpers Interstellar Orchestra, jogging through the base with 23rd century rock, and spending some time journaling in her late father's notebook while overlooking the curved horizon of Zeta Halo as it orbits the planet of Fsu-1. Returning to the base while listening to Revian throat singing, she overhears conversations from others about collapsing colonies, awakening Forerunner constructs, the disappearance of the Master Chief, and the AI Cortana's aggressive takeover of the galaxy. Despite the chaos, she tries to stay focused on her work, overseeing the mapping of the ring. Later, while performing a routine comms check, she can only get static. Then her radio begins to crackle with what seems to be faint piano music and a soft humming. But before she can react, a Marine bursts into the tower, panicking, who then drags her outside. When she looks up, a Guardian Custode has emerged and hovers in the sky above the ring. Seconds later, every communications device across the base erupts with the same piano music as before, which she now recognizes as Claude Debussy's Preludes No. 4. As they all scramble to alert Earth to Cortana's presence on Zeta Halo, they are completely unaware that no one would receive their message. Whew, alright guys, and with that, I just summarized 22 freaking Waypoint Chronicles, all of which I just recorded in one sitting. I think my recording is like over 4 hours long now, but this was quite the undertaking, and once again, I'm sure that this video is going to be probably the longest video I've made yet. But if you made it to the end of all of this, I have to tell you, I really appreciate you sticking around. And like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are an additional 10 all-new stories that will be featured in this anthology, all of which we know next to nothing about, with maybe the exception of those people who might have grabbed a copy at Barnes & Noble early because for some reason publication dates just seem to mean nothing to them, but I personally didn't want to try and get one or at least spoil anything for anybody else. But if you would like me to cover those in a future video, I would be more than happy to do that. Just be sure to let me know down in the comments. And that goes for the other included stories as well, you know, the intels, the story shards, and those armory infinitums. Otherwise, please be sure to drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you are new to the channel. You know, I recently just celebrated 15,000 subscribers, but I feel like we're already well on our way to 20,000, so I'd love to have you all join the community if you'd be so kind. But that is all for today, and again, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.